I own those woods in my heart, but those woods own me too. I had such a sense of ownership of those woods that as an 8-year-old, I pulled out, I think, hundreds of survey stakes. That I knew had something to do with the bulldozers that were taking out other woods. And I think I held them off for a while. Remember those survey stakes? They made great swords. I had a whole stack of them behind the hedge. How many here, be honest, there's no cameras that I know of, how many here did something like that when you were kids? There you go. You're hereby inducted into the secret society of stake pullers. You are stakeholders in that society. That sense of ownership and of being owned by a place. I talk about that often. I talked about it a few years ago in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at a group called the Quivira Coalition, which is a group that's bringing conservative ranchers together with environmentalists. They're doing land trusts throughout the West to protect both the ranch way of life, but also nature itself. This issue brings people together across political lines like no other that I've ever seen. So I gave my sermon ad, and then afterwards during the Q&A period, a rancher stood up. He was in his 60s, he had a white handlebar mustache, he was sunburned, he had plastic rimmed glasses. His jeans had not been acid washed. He was the real deal. And he said, with his glasses, he said, "You know that story you told about pulling out survey stakes?" I said, "Yep." He said, "I did that when I was a boy." And then he began to cry in front of 500 people, half of whom were wearing cavalry hats. Despite his deep sense of embarrassment, he continued to talk about his sense of grief, that his might be one of the last generations to have that kind of sense of ownership of land, and it has nothing to do with money. It has to do with feeling owned by that land. It has to do with feeling that your feet are planted somewhere, and that beneath those feet is meaning, and that above you is meaning, and that you belong. Those woods that were my woods, I still carry those woods, even though the bulldozers finally did come, and most of those woods got taken out. I still carry those woods in my heart. Sometimes I go to those woods, and I find something there that I don't find anywhere else. A certain kind of strength, a peaceful kind of strength. It's hard to describe, but I go to those woods. And I'll bet you have a place in your heart that you go to sometimes. It is from your special place in nature. I won't bore you with all the statistics about the disconnection between children and nature that has happened almost overnight. In the matter of just a few decades, eons of time have been reversed in a sense. For all of human history and prehistory, children went outside and spent most of their developing years either working or playing in nature. And within the matter of 3 or 4 decades, that is slowly reversing to the point where it is becoming not the norm for children to go out and just lie on their back and watch the leaves move. That's happening too fast. The great nature writer Bill McKibben gave a nice blurb for this book early on. He said, "This is the greatest, one of the biggest experiments in human history, and we don't know how it's going to turn out." This disconnection is something that touches us deep within ourselves. I kept thinking this, writing this book and The Nature Principle, the one that's more about adults that came after. Yes, I'm writing about health. I'm writing about attention deficit disorder and the studies that show that just a little bit of contact with nature and those symptoms go down. Yes, I'm writing about the ability to learn, about how learning goes up when kids do it, and all kinds of kids, not just the kids we call nature kids, but all kinds of kids. Learning gets better when you do it outside. Yes, it's about that. But it's about a lot more even than health and learning, cognitive functioning. The scientists who study the human senses now no longer talk about 5 senses. They talk conservatively about 10 senses. And some of them talk about as many as 30 human senses. And they all have names. We have some of the ability of bats to use echolocation. Some people who have lost their sight have begun to learn echolocation formally, to know where they are in a room, in a building. We have some of the ability of bloodhounds. We can actually track through the woods just with our nose, with eyes closed and covered and ears plugged. We can do this, and the people who have studied this have found, using college students as guinea pigs, of course, have found that the subjects in those studies do something very strange. We do, as a species, what all species do that actually make their living through their noses. When we're down there tracking on our hands and knees, these students zigzag. This is part of who we are. E.O. Wilson, the great Harvard teacher, talks about the biophilia hypothesis, which he came up with several decades ago. Basically, it holds that we have an inborn affinity for nature, that we are genetically wired to have an affiliation for nature. Studies have been done of what images people all through the world are attracted to, no matter whether they live in cities or in the countryside. And all over the world, human beings, of all of the images that human beings see and put in front of them, the images that they are most attracted to are images of nature, and of those, landscapes. And of the landscapes, the number one image that all human beings are attracted to more than any other is the savanna. It's this right here. This is the image that most human beings are most attracted to. It's an open area rimmed by forest with signs of human habitation. That's how it's defined by E.O. Wilson in these studies. This is where we are from. This is where we stand. This is the land beneath our feet. All of us, no matter where we're from, even if we've never stepped off the sidewalk, this is where we're from. I've begun to think that we need to begin to think about this. Actually, I thought about this several years ago. I've been talking about it. We need to see this in a deeper way than simply health, as important that is, or raising test scores. And it will raise test scores. Schools that incorporate this. What we've done, we've created an environment not only for our kids but for ourselves. And I will plead guilty to this too. I have a real struggle getting away from my screens. Our kids now sit in classrooms and then sit at home, expending huge amounts of energy to block out most of those 30 human senses, to block them out, to use less of their ability to feel and see and know. That to me is the very definition of being less alive. What parent wants their child to be less alive? I don't know any. What teacher wants their students to be less alive? Maybe they exist, but I don't know. Who among us wants to be less alive? And that's the conditions that we are setting up for our children. That's not that I'm an anti-tech. I love my iPads, but too much. There's a phrase that goes throughout the nature principle, which is the more high-tech our lives become, the more nature we need. We absolutely have to have this. To balance, we're going to be more high-tech. So that means we need more of this. We need more of the Greenway.